There is a place on Earth where the land ends and the ice begins. Beyond the ice, there is nothing at all. No roads, no ships, no voices. Only wind dragging itself across a frozen sea. A sea that stretches in every direction until the horizon swallows it whole. The sky is the same color as the ground, white pressing against white, and somewhere between them, on a strip of frozen rock barely visible from the air, a single figure moves through the snow. A lone human shape against an endless white world. She is small. She walks slowly. Her boots crack through the crust of ice with every step. Behind her, a makeshift shelter sags under the weight of months of storms. The canvas walls shudder. Driftwood beams groan against the wind. Around the camp, the remains of crates and equipment lie half buried, slowly vanishing beneath the snow as though the island itself is swallowing them. She stops walking. She stands still. She looks out across the frozen ocean to the south and sees exactly what she saw yesterday and the day before and every day for weeks before that. Nothing. No dark shape of a hull cutting through the ice. No smoke, no signal, no rescue. She is alone on Wrangel Island, a slab of frozen earth roughly the size of Delaware. It sits in the Arctic Ocean between Siberia and Alaska. The nearest settlement is hundreds of miles away, across pack ice, across open water. The 4 men she came here with are gone. 3 of them walked out onto that ice months ago and never came back. The 4th is dead. She buried him herself. Her name is Ada Blackjack. She is 23 years old. She is an Inupiat woman from Nome, Alaska. She has almost no wilderness survival experience. She was never meant to be here alone, and yet she is the only one still breathing. To understand how she ended up standing on that frozen shore, you have to go back nearly 2 years. To the moment, 5 people boarded a small ship in Nome and sailed north. The year was 1921. The expedition was the idea of Vilhjalmur Stefansson, a famous Arctic explorer, a man who believed Wrangel Island could be claimed for the British Empire and turned into a northern outpost. Stefansson himself would not be going. He rarely did. He was the kind of man who drew lines on maps and sent younger men to walk them. 4 men joined the expedition. Alan Crawford, 20 years old, hungry for adventure. Lorne Knight, the most experienced of them all. Fred Maurer, a veteran of Arctic travel. Milton Gall, 19, the youngest. All of them were driven by the promise of glory, by visions of themselves as conquerors of the frozen north. Ada Blackjack was not driven by glory. She was driven by desperation. Back in Nome, her young son Bennett was sick with tuberculosis. She needed money for his medical care. When the expedition advertised for an Inupiat woman to serve as a seamstress and camp cook, she applied. She was quiet. She was shy. She had spent most of her life in small coastal communities and had little experience hunting or trapping. She was afraid of guns. She was afraid of the wilderness. But she was more afraid of watching her son die without treatment. The ship dropped them on Wrangel Island in September 1921. 5 people, a small collection of supplies, a few guns, some traps, and a cat named Vic. Stefansson had assured them that a resupply ship would arrive within the year. The island, he said, was rich with game. They would hunt caribou, trap foxes, live off the land until relief came. It would be a grand northern adventure. It was not. The first months passed with a kind of uneasy normalcy. The men hunted when they could. Ada sewed clothing and prepared food, but the game Stefansson had promised was sparse. Caribou were scarce. The seals were difficult to approach across the broken shore ice. Foxes could be trapped, but their thin meat offered little sustenance. As autumn darkened into the polar winter, the sun slid below the horizon and did not return. Temperatures plummeted. The wind became something alive, something that hunted them, pressing through the walls of their shelter and pulling the heat from their bodies while they slept. By the 2nd year, the resupply ship had not come. The ice conditions in the summer of 1922 had been too severe. The vessel turned back without reaching the island. No one on Wrangel Island knew this. They only knew that the horizon remained empty. Day after day, week after week, through the brief Arctic summer and into the next punishing winter. Food supplies dwindled, rations tightened. What had been meals became portions, and portions became scraps. They began eating seal blubber and boiled fox. They searched the frozen coastline for anything edible. The mood in the camp shifted. Conversations grew shorter, arguments grew longer. The cold worked on their bodies and the hunger worked on their minds, and slowly the thin fabric of civilized cooperation began to tear. In January 1923, 3 of the men made a decision. Crawford, Gale, and Maurer would attempt to cross the frozen sea to Siberia, roughly 100 miles to the southwest, to seek help. It was a desperate plan. The pack ice between Wrangel Island and Siberia was a broken landscape. Pressure ridges, cracks of black water opening in the ice. Crossing it on foot, in winter, with limited supplies, was extraordinarily dangerous. But staying was slow starvation. They chose the risk. Lorne Knight was too sick to travel. He had developed what appeared to be scurvy, his joints swelling, his gums bleeding, his strength fading by the day. He would stay behind. Ada would stay to care for him. The 3 men walked south across the ice on the 28th of January 1923. Ada watched them go. Their figures grew smaller against the white until they were just dark points on the horizon. Then they were gone. She never saw any of them again. No one ever did. No trace of Crawford, Gale, or Maurer was ever found. The Arctic simply took them, silently, completely, the way it had taken so many before. Now it was 2, Ada and Knight, alone in the camp, surrounded by hundreds of miles of ice and silence. Knight was getting worse. He could barely stand. His body was deteriorating, ravaged by vitamin deficiency, and something deeper, something no amount of rest could fix. Ada fed him what she could. She boiled broth from fox bones. She melted snow for water. She kept the fire alive. She mended his clothes and wrapped his swollen limbs and listened to his breathing in the darkness of the shelter while the wind screamed outside. But Knight was also cruel to her. Even in his weakened state, he berated her. He criticized her cooking, her hunting, her competence. He wrote harsh words about her in his diary. Ada endured it. She had spent her life enduring things. She kept caring for him because there was no one else to do it, and because leaving a dying man alone in the Arctic was something she could not bring herself to do, no matter how he treated her. On the 23rd of June 1923, Lorne Knight died. Ada was alone. She stood beside his body in the shelter, and understood something with terrible clarity. No one was coming. No one knew the 3 men had failed. No one knew Knight was dead. No one was looking for her. She was a single human being on an uninhabited island in the Arctic Ocean, with limited ammunition, dwindling supplies, no survival training, and a fear of almost everything around her. The terror she felt in those first days alone was paralyzing. She wrote about it later. The silence was the worst part. Not the cold, not the hunger, but the silence. The absolute, suffocating absence of another human voice. The wind filled the space where conversation used to be, and the wind said nothing. She was afraid of polar bears. They roamed the island's coast, enormous, pale, moving like ghosts through the fog. She had seen them circle the camp before. Now there was no one to stand watch while she slept. But Ada Blackjack did not die. Something in her, something deeper than fear, deeper than exhaustion, refused to let her lie down and stop. She began to teach herself the skills she had never learned. She studied the traps the men had set and figured out how to reset them. She caught foxes. She caught birds. She began to hunt seals along the shoreline, teaching herself to shoot the rifle she had always been afraid of. Her hands shook the first time she pulled the trigger. They shook the second time too. But the seal fell, and she dragged it back to camp, and she ate. She fortified the shelter against polar bears, building a raised platform where she could sleep out of reach. She fashioned a lookout from driftwood and old crates, so she could spot approaching animals before they reached the camp. She rationed her ammunition carefully, counting each bullet as though it were a day of life, because in a way it was. She kept the expedition's logbook and her own diary, writing down what she did each day, what she ate, what she saw. The writing was not elegant. It was not meant to be. It was proof that she was still alive, proof that someone was still thinking, still choosing to survive on this frozen edge of the world. The polar winter came again. The sun disappeared below the horizon, and the sky turned the color of deep bruises, purples and blacks that hung over the island for months. The temperature dropped to 50, 60 degrees below zero. The ice groaned and cracked in the darkness, like the bones of some enormous animal shifting in its sleep. Ada kept her fire burning. She kept eating. She kept moving. She checked her traps. She watched for bears. She talked to the cat, Vic, who was somehow still alive, a small, warm heartbeat in the frozen silence. The cat may have saved her mind. Days blurred into each other. Time became meaningless. There was only the rhythm of survival. Wake, eat, check the traps, melt snow, mend clothing, watch the horizon, sleep. Wake again. The loneliness was a physical thing. It sat on her chest like a stone. She missed her son. She thought about Bennett constantly, the boy she had left behind so she could earn money to save him. The terrible irony of it pressed against her every waking moment. She had come to the end of the world to save her child, and now she might never see him again. But she kept going, day after day, week after week, through the endless dark, through the storms that buried the camp, in drifts of snow so deep she had to dig her way out of the shelter, through the hunger that gnawed at her stomach and made her hands tremble, through the fear that woke her in the night, heart pounding, certain she had heard something moving outside the walls. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, as though the sun itself was unsure it wanted to return. The light crept back in pale increments. The ice began to shift and groan as the temperatures climbed above freezing for the first time in months. Ada watched the horizon with desperate, guarded hope. She had been alone for nearly 5 months. She had survived an Arctic winter by herself, something that experienced explorers had failed to do. Then one morning, something appeared on the horizon, a dark shape moving slowly through the ice. A ship. The ship was the schooner Donaldson. It had been sent north to check on the expedition. Its hull pushed slowly through the broken ice toward the island. The crew expected to find 5 people. Some of them privately expected to find none. What they found instead was a single woman, thin but alive, standing on the frozen beach with a cat at her feet. She had maintained the camp. She had kept herself fed. She had endured the polar winter alone. She was quiet when they brought her aboard. She did not celebrate. She did not weep. She simply sat down and asked about her son. Ada Blackjack returned to Nome. She was reunited with Bennett. She used the money she earned from the expedition to pay for his care. For a brief period, newspapers called her the female Robinson Crusoe. But fame was not kind to her, and it did not last. Stephenson, eager to protect his reputation, downplayed her survival and questioned her character. Some accused her of not doing enough to save Knight. The men who had organized the expedition from the safety of warm offices passed judgment on a woman who had survived what none of them could have endured. Ada never sought the spotlight. She lived quietly for the rest of her long life, passing away in 1983 at the age of 85 in a small community in Alaska. She rarely spoke about Wrangel Island. The memories lived inside her like permafrost, frozen deep, never fully thawing. But the truth of what she did remains. A young Inupiat mother with no survival training, terrified of the wilderness, walked into the most hostile environment on Earth, watched everyone around her disappear or die, and chose, every single day, to keep living, not because she was fearless, not because she was extraordinary, but because somewhere on that frozen island, in the howling dark, she decided that her son still needed her, and that was enough. The Arctic does not care about courage. It does not care about plans, or ambition, or the names men carve into maps. It asks only one question, again and again in the voice of the wind. Can you endure? Ada Blackjack answered,